Emily Parker, a single mother of two, found herself racing through the aisles of a crowded grocery store, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story that will touch your heart and make you reflect on what really matters in life. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, wisps escaping to frame her face, which was etched with lines of worry. In her cart, she had carefully selected items, the bare necessities to feed her family for the week. Each product was a calculated choice, a balancing act between nutrition and affordability. As she maneuvered through the maze of shoppers, Emily's mind was a whirlwind of concerns. Bills piled up at home like mountains she couldn't climb, and the weight of sole responsibility for her children's well-being pressed down on her shoulders. She glanced at her watch, a simple timepiece that had seen better days, and realized with a start that she was running late. The after-school program where her kids waited wouldn't extend their hours again without charging extra, an expense she simply couldn't afford. With trembling hands, Emily began to unload her groceries onto the conveyor belt at the checkout counter. The beep of each scanned item seemed to echo her rising anxiety. As the total climbed higher and higher, she silently prayed that she had calculated correctly, that there would be enough money in her account to cover this essential purchase. The cashier, a young woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Sarah, offered a sympathetic smile as she rang up the last item. "That'll be $78.53, she announced, her voice gentle as if she could sense Emily's distress. Emily nodded, forcing a smile as she reached for her wallet. She pulled out her debit card, the plastic worn and faded from frequent use. With a deep breath, she swiped it through the reader, her heart in her throat as she waited for the transaction to process. Seconds ticked by, feeling like an eternity. And then, the dreaded words appeared on the screen. Transaction declined. Emily's face flushed with embarrassment, her cheeks burning as if they were on fire. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, fumbling in her purse for any cash she might have overlooked. "There must be some mistake. Can we try again?" Sarah nodded sympathetically, running the card once more. But the result was the same: declined. Emily's eyes began to well up with tears of frustration and shame. She could feel the impatient stares of the people waiting in line behind her, their sighs and shuffling feet a chorus of judgment. "I'm sorry," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll have to put some things back." The thought of having to choose which necessities to leave behind made her stomach churn. How would she explain to her children that there wouldn't be enough food this week? As Emily began to sort through her groceries, trying to decide what she could do without, a deep voice spoke up from the next line over. "Stop," it said, with a quiet authority that made everyone turn to look. The voice belonged to an older man, tall and distinguished, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of stories. He wore an expensive suit that spoke of wealth. But there was something in his demeanor that suggested a deep-seated loneliness. This was Robert Hayes, though Emily didn't know it yet. Without a word, Robert stepped forward, pulling out a sleek leather wallet. "I'll take care of this," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He handed his credit card to Sarah, who looked between Emily and Robert with surprise. Emily, stunned by this unexpected act of kindness, found her voice. "Oh no, sir. I couldn't possibly." But Robert cut her off with a gentle wave of his hand. "It's no trouble," he said, his eyes meeting Emily's for a brief moment. In that instant, she saw something in them, a flicker of pain, quickly masked by a polite smile. "Please, allow me to do this." Overwhelmed by emotion, Emily could only nod, watching in disbelief as Robert completed the transaction. As Sarah handed him the receipt, Emily found her words again. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. "I don't know how to repay you." Robert shook his head, already turning away. "There's no need," he replied. "Take care of your family." And with that, he was gone, disappearing into the crowd of shoppers like a phantom. Emily stood there for a moment, clutching her grocery bags, her mind reeling from what had just happened. Who was this man? Why would he help a complete stranger? As she made her way out of the store, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than a simple act of generosity. Little did Emily know that this chance encounter would be the beginning of a journey that would not only change her life, but also bring healing and purpose to a man who had long ago given up on both. As she loaded her groceries into her car, her heart still racing from the emotional roller coaster of the past few minutes, Emily had no idea that she had just met someone who would become an integral part of her life. Robert Hayes, the mysterious benefactor, drove home in silence, his thoughts a tumultuous sea of emotions. The simple act of helping the young mother had stirred something within him, a feeling he had long suppressed. As he pulled up to the gates of his sprawling mansion, he couldn't help but contrast the warmth of that brief human connection with the cold emptiness that awaited him inside. For years, Robert had lived a life of isolation, his vast wealth providing a barrier between him and the rest of the world. The mansion, with its meticulously manicured gardens and state-of-the-art security system, was more of a fortress than a home. As he walked through the grand entrance, the echo of his footsteps in the cavernous foyer seemed to mock him, a stark reminder of his solitude. He made his way to his study, a room lined with leather-bound books and adorned with priceless art pieces. But instead of finding comfort in his surroundings, Robert felt suffocated by the opulence. He poured himself a glass of expensive scotch, the amber liquid glinting in the fading sunlight that filtered through the windows. As he sipped his drink, Robert's gaze fell upon a photograph on his desk, the only personal touch in the otherwise impersonal room. It showed a younger version of himself, smiling broadly with his arm around a beautiful woman. Between them stood a young boy, no more than 7 or 8, with Robert's blue eyes and his mother's warm smile. The sight of the photo sent a sharp pain through Robert's chest. It had been 15 years since the accident that took his wife and son from him, but the grief still felt as fresh as if it had happened yesterday. In the blink of an eye, his world had shattered, and he had retreated into a shell of wealth and isolation. Robert ran his fingers over the photograph, his mind drifting back to the young mother in the grocery store. For a brief moment, he had felt something, a spark of the man he used to be, the man who cared about others and found joy in helping those in need. It was a feeling he had thought long dead, buried along with his family. As night fell and the mansion grew dark around him, Robert found himself unable to shake the memory of the encounter. The gratitude in the woman's eyes, the weight lifting from her shoulders, it had awakened something in him, a longing for connection that he had denied for far too long. For the first time in years, Robert Hayes went to bed that night with a glimmer of something other than despair in his heart. It wasn't quite hope. He wasn't ready for that yet, but it was a crack in the armor he had built around himself. As he drifted off to sleep, he couldn't help but wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't too late to find his way back to the world of the living. Meanwhile, across town in a modest apartment, Emily Parker tucked her children into bed with a sense of relief she hadn't felt in months. As she kissed her daughter's forehead and smoothed her son's unruly hair, she silently thanked the mysterious stranger who had eased her burden, if only for a moment. Sitting at her small kitchen table, surrounded by bills and budget sheets, Emily found her thoughts returning to the man from the grocery store. There had been kindness in his eyes, yes, but also a profound sadness that she couldn't quite shake. She wondered about his story, about what could drive a person of such obvious means to reach out to a stranger in need. As she prepared for bed, Emily made a decision. She would find a way to thank the man properly, to let him know just how much his act of generosity had meant to her and her family. Little did she know that this simple decision would set in motion a series of events that would intertwine their lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Emily. Between her job as a part-time teacher's assistant and caring for her children, she barely had a moment to breathe. But the memory of the kind stranger lingered in her mind, a bright spot amidst the daily struggles. It was on a particularly hectic Thursday afternoon that Emily found herself back at the same grocery store. Her daughter, Lily, had a school project that required poster board and markers, items that weren't in the budget but couldn't be avoided. As she walked through the automatic doors, her eyes scanned the store, half hoping to catch a glimpse of her mysterious benefactor. Instead, she found herself face to face with Sarah, the cashier who had witnessed the encounter. Sarah's face lit up with recognition. "Hey there," she called out, waving Emily over. "I was hoping I'd see you again. How are you doing?" Emily smiled, touched by the young woman's genuine concern. "I'm doing better, thank you. I actually came back hoping to thank the gentleman who helped me the other day. You wouldn't happen to know who he is, would you?" Sarah's expression turned thoughtful. "Well, I'm not supposed to give out customer information, but—" She leaned in, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "That was Mr. Robert Hayes. He's kind of a local legend around here." Emily's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "A legend? How so?" Sarah glanced around to make sure no one was listening before continuing. "He's one of the wealthiest men in the city. Lives in that huge mansion up on Oakwood Hill. But here's the thing. No one ever sees him. He's like a ghost, you know. Comes in here once in a blue moon, always alone, never talks to anyone. What he did for you? Well, let's just say it's not something anyone around here has seen before." Emily listened, fascinated by this glimpse into the life of the man who had shown her such kindness. He seemed sad, she mused, almost to herself. Sarah nodded solemnly. "That's the other part of the legend. They say he lost his family years ago, wife and kid, I think. Been a recluse ever since. It's all very mysterious." As Emily left the store, her mind was buzzing with this new information. Robert Hayes, a name to put to the face that had been haunting her thoughts. A wealthy recluse with a tragic past. It was like something out of a novel, and yet she had experienced his kindness firsthand. Driven by a mix of curiosity and a genuine desire to express her gratitude, Emily found herself taking a detour on her way home. She drove up to Oakwood Hill, her old car feeling out of place among the luxury vehicles that lined the streets. And then she saw it, the Hayes mansion. It was a sprawling estate, its stone facade speaking of old money and quiet power. But as Emily slowed her car to take in the sight, she couldn't help but notice how lifeless it seemed. The curtains were drawn. The gardens, while immaculate, had a sterile quality to them. It was a far cry from the warm, lived-in homes that surrounded it. Emily's heart ached as she thought of Mr. Hayes living alone in that grand, empty house. The sadness she had glimpsed in his eyes now made perfect sense. Here was a man who had everything money could buy, and yet he seemed to have nothing at all. As she drove home, Emily made a decision. She would find a way to reach out to Mr. Hayes, to show him that his kindness had not gone unnoticed or unappreciated. She didn't know how exactly, but she was determined to try. That evening, as she helped her children with their homework and prepared a simple dinner, Emily's mind kept drifting back to the lonely millionaire. She thought about how a single act of kindness could ripple outward, touching lives in unexpected ways. Mr. Hayes had eased her burden without a second thought, and now she felt called to do something for him in return. After tucking her children into bed, Emily sat down at the kitchen table with a pen and paper. She began to write, pouring out her gratitude and her thoughts onto the page. It wasn't much, just a heartfelt thank you note, but it was a start. As she sealed the envelope, Emily felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in a long time. Tomorrow, she decided, she would bake a batch of cookies, her grandmother's recipe, the one that always brought comfort and a sense of home. She would deliver the cookies and the note to Mr. Hayes's mansion, a small gesture of thanks and perhaps, she hoped, a spark of warmth in what seemed to be a very cold and lonely life. Little did Emily know that this simple act of gratitude would be the pebble that started an avalanche, setting in motion a series of events that would change not only her life and the lives of her children, but also breathe new life into the world of Robert Hayes. As she went to bed that night, Emily couldn't have imagined the journey that lay ahead, a journey of healing, connection, and rediscovery that would touch the lives of an entire community. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect autumn day that seemed to mirror Emily's sense of purpose. She woke early, before her children, and set about baking the cookies. The kitchen soon filled with the warm, comforting aroma of vanilla and cinnamon, a scent that never failed to make Emily think of lazy Sunday afternoons at her grandmother's house. As she worked, Emily found herself humming softly, her spirits lifted by the simple act of creating something with her hands. When her children, Lily and Max, stumbled sleepily into the kitchen, their eyes widened at the sight of the freshly baked cookies cooling on the counter. "What's the occasion, Mom?" Max asked, reaching for a cookie only to have his hand gently swatted away by Emily. "These aren't for us, sweetie," Emily explained, ruffling her son's hair affectionately. "Remember the kind man who helped us at the grocery store? We're going to thank him properly." Lily's face lit up with excitement. "Can we come with you to give them to him?" Emily hesitated, thinking of the imposing mansion and the reclusive man who lived there. "Not this time, honey. But how about you both help me wrap them up nicely?" The children eagerly agreed, and soon they were all gathered around the table, carefully arranging the cookies in a simple but elegant box Emily had saved for special occasions. As they worked, Emily told them what she had learned about Mr. Hayes, carefully editing out the sadder parts of his story. "He sounds lonely," Lily observed with the innocent wisdom of a child. "Maybe he needs friends." Emily smiled at her daughter's insight. "You might be right, sweetheart. Sometimes even grown-ups need reminding that they're not alone." After dropping the children off at school, Emily made her way to Oakwood Hill, the box of cookies and her heartfelt note sitting on the passenger seat beside her. As she approached the Hayes mansion, she felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. What if he didn't want to be bothered? What if this gesture was unwelcome? Pushing aside her doubts, Emily parked her car and walked up to the imposing front gates. There was an intercom system, but she hesitated to use it, not wanting to intrude. Instead, she carefully placed the box and envelope just inside the gate, where they would be easily visible, but not in the way. As she turned to leave, Emily caught movement out of the corner of her eye. Looking up, she saw a curtain in one of the upper windows twitch, as if someone had been watching and had quickly stepped back. Her heart skipped a beat at the thought that Mr. Hayes might have seen her, but she resisted the urge to linger or call out. Instead, she offered a small wave towards the window and made her way back to her car. As Emily drove away, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Had Mr. Hayes seen her? Would he appreciate the gesture, or would he see it as an intrusion? She couldn't shake the image of that briefly moving curtain, a tantalizing hint of the man hidden away in that grand, lonely house. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Robert Hayes stood frozen by the window, his heart racing. He had been in his study, absently leafing through financial reports, when movement at the gate had caught his eye. At first, He'd thought it was just another delivery, but then he'd recognized her, the woman from the grocery store. Robert had watched, transfixed, as Emily carefully placed something by the gate. Her gesture, so simple and yet so laden with meaning, had stirred something within him. When she'd looked up, he'd instinctively stepped back, years of isolation making him wary of direct contact. But he'd seen her wave, a small, hopeful gesture that now replayed in his mind. For several long moments, Robert stood there, torn between his ingrained habit of seclusion and a new, almost forgotten feeling, curiosity. Finally, with a deep breath, he made his way downstairs and out to the gate. There, just where Emily had left them, sat a beautifully wrapped box and an envelope. With hands that trembled slightly, Robert picked them up, glancing down the street as if he might still catch a glimpse of Emily's departing car. But the street was empty, quiet in the late morning sun. Back in his study, Robert carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note, the script neat and earnest. Dear Mr. Hayes, I hope this note finds you well. My name is Emily Parker, and you helped me at the grocery store last week when my card was declined. I wanted to thank you properly for your kindness. It meant more to me than you could know. I baked these cookies as a small token of my gratitude. They're my grandmother's recipe. She always said that nothing chases away loneliness like the smell of fresh-baked cookies. Thank you again for your generosity. In a world that can sometimes feel cold and uncaring, your act of kindness was a reminder that there is still goodness to be found. Warmest regards, Emily Parker. Robert read the note twice, then 3 times, his eyes lingering on each carefully chosen word. It had been so long since anyone had reached out to him like this, with no agenda other than simple human kindness. He found himself blinking back unexpected tears. With slightly shaky hands, he opened the box of cookies. The rich, comforting aroma of cinnamon and vanilla wafted up, instantly transporting him back to happier times. Sunday afternoons with his wife and son, laughter echoing through a kitchen warmed by freshly baked treats. For the first time in years, Robert Hayes felt a crack in the walls he'd built around his heart. This small act of kindness from a stranger had touched something deep within him, a part he'd thought long dead. As he bit into a cookie, savoring the sweet, homemade taste, he felt a stirring of something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Hope. In that moment, surrounded by the trappings of his wealth but warmed by this simple gift, Robert made a decision. He would respond to Emily's note. It was a small step, terrifying in its implications of opening himself up to the world again, but one he suddenly felt compelled to take. As he sat down at his desk to pen a reply, Robert couldn't have known that this exchange of notes would be the beginning of a journey that would not only change his life, but touch the lives of many others in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The lonely millionaire and the struggling single mother were about to embark on a path of friendship, healing, and rediscovery that would ripple out into their community, proving that sometimes the most profound changes start with the smallest acts of kindness. Robert's hand hovered over the pristine stationery, his pen poised to write. It had been so long since he'd written a personal letter that the task felt almost foreign to him. After several false starts and crumpled sheets of paper, he finally began to write. Dear Mrs. Parker, your kindness has touched me deeply. I must confess, I was surprised to receive your thoughtful gift and note. In truth, I had not expected to hear from you again after our brief encounter at the grocery store. The cookies are delicious and brought back fond memories I had long forgotten. Your grandmother's recipe is indeed special. Thank you for sharing it with me. I appreciate your gratitude, but please know that helping you that day was no trouble at all. If anything, I should be thanking you. Your genuine warmth and the love you clearly have for your family reminded me of the good that still exists in this world. While I am grateful for your gesture, I must ask that you not trouble yourself further on my account. Your focus should remain on your family. They are fortunate to have someone as caring as you in their lives. Sincerely, Robert Hayes. As he sealed the envelope, Robert felt a mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. Part of him wanted to reach out, to connect with this kind woman who had gone out of her way to thank him. But another part, the part that had grown accustomed to solitude and self-protection, urged him to maintain his distance. The next morning, Robert asked his housekeeper, Mrs. Thompson, to deliver the letter to Emily's home. Mrs. Thompson, a kind-faced woman in her 60s who had worked for Robert for over a decade, couldn't hide her surprise at being asked to perform such a personal task. In all her years of service, she had never seen Mr. Hayes engage in any form of social correspondence. "Is everything all right, Mr. Hayes?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Robert managed a small smile. "Yes, Mrs. Thompson. Everything is fine. This is just a thank you note for a kind gesture someone made." As Mrs. Thompson left to deliver the letter, Robert found himself standing by the window, watching her car disappear down the driveway. He felt a strange sense of anticipation, mixed with a touch of anxiety. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, and he wasn't quite sure what to make of it. Meanwhile, Emily was going about her day, juggling her job at the school and her responsibilities at home. She had just finished helping Max with his math homework when there was a knock at the door. Opening it, she was surprised to see an older woman she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Parker?" the woman asked. Emily nodded, curiosity piqued. "I'm Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Hayes's housekeeper. He asked me to deliver this to you." She handed Emily an envelope, the paper thick and expensive under her fingers. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. "Oh, thank you so much. Please tell Mr. Hayes I appreciate him taking the time to respond." As Mrs. Thompson left, Emily closed the door and stared at the envelope in her hands. She hadn't really expected a response from Mr. Hayes. The fact that he had taken the time to write back filled her with a warmth she couldn't quite explain. With slightly trembling hands, she opened the letter and began to read. As she took in Robert's words, a mix of emotions washed over her. She was touched by his gratitude and the hint of vulnerability in his words. But she also sensed a reluctance, a gentle attempt to maintain distance. Emily sat down at her small kitchen table, rereading the letter. She couldn't shake the feeling that behind Mr. Hayes's polite words was a man desperately in need of connection, even if he didn't realize it himself. As she folded the letter and tucked it away, Emily made a decision. She wouldn't push, but she wouldn't give up either. Something told her that Robert Hayes needed a friend, whether he was ready to admit it or not. And Emily, with her big heart and determined spirit, was just the person to offer that friendship. Little did either of them know that this exchange of letters was just the beginning. In the days and weeks to come, their lives would become increasingly intertwined, leading to changes neither could have anticipated. The lonely millionaire and the compassionate single mother were about to embark on a journey that would not only transform their own lives, but also touch the hearts of an entire community. As night fell over Chicago, two people in very different circumstances found their thoughts turning to each other. In his grand, empty mansion, Robert Hayes felt a small spark of something he hadn't experienced in years, a connection to the outside world. And in her modest apartment, surrounded by the warmth of her children's laughter, Emily Parker felt a sense of purpose beyond her daily struggles. Neither could have guessed how profoundly their chance encounter would shape their futures. In the days that followed, Emily found herself thinking often about Mr. Hayes and his letter. The polite refusal of further contact hadn't deterred her. If anything, It had strengthened her resolve. There was something about the loneliness she had sensed in him that resonated with her own struggles as a single mother. She understood all too well how isolating life could be, even when surrounded by people. One evening, after tucking Lily and Max into bed, Emily sat at her small kitchen table, a blank sheet of paper before her. She tapped her pen thoughtfully against her chin, considering her next move. Finally, with a determined nod, she began to write. Dear Mr. Hayes, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to thank you for your kind response to my note and cookies. Your words meant a great deal to me. I understand your desire for me to focus on my family, and I assure you they are always my primary concern. However, I also believe that reaching out to others and building connections in our community is an important part of creating a better world for my children to grow up in. With that in mind, I hope you won't mind if I share a little more about myself and my family. My daughter, Lily, is 8 years old and has a passion for art. She spends hours drawing and painting, creating worlds of color and imagination. My son, Max, is 6 and is fascinated by anything with wheels. He dreams of being a race car driver one day. As for me, I work as a teacher's assistant at the local elementary school. It's challenging work, especially as a single mother, but I find great joy in helping children learn and grow. I hope you don't find this letter presumptuous. I simply wanted to express my gratitude once again, and to let you know that your kindness has had a lasting impact on our lives. Warmest regards, Emily Parker. Emily read over the letter several times, making small adjustments here and there. She knew she was taking a risk by reaching out again, but something in her heart told her it was the right thing to do. As she sealed the envelope, she said a silent prayer that Mr. Hayes would receive her words in the spirit they were intended. The next day, Emily dropped the letter off at Mr. Hayes's mansion on her way to work. As she slipped it through the gate, she couldn't help but glance up at the windows, wondering if he might be watching. The house seemed as still and silent as ever, but Emily left with a sense of hope. Meanwhile, Robert Hayes was finding it difficult to return to his usual routine. The exchange with Emily had stirred something in him, awakening feelings and memories he had long suppressed. He found himself thinking of his late wife and son more frequently, but for the first time in years, the memories brought a bitter-sweet warmth rather than just pain. When Mrs. Thompson brought him Emily's second letter, Robert was surprised to find his hands shaking slightly as he opened it. As he read Emily's words, a complex mix of emotions washed over him. Part of him wanted to maintain the walls he had built around himself, to retreat back into the safety of isolation. But another part, a part that was growing stronger by the day, yearned for the human connection that Emily was offering. For several days, Robert agonized over how to respond. He drafted countless replies, each one discarded as soon as it was written. He found himself pacing the long hallways of his mansion, lost in thought, wrestling with the fear and longing that Emily's simple act of kindness had awakened in him. Finally, after nearly a week of internal debate, Robert sat down at his desk and began to write. Dear Mrs. Parker, I must admit, your persistence has taken me by surprise. It has been a long time since anyone has shown such genuine interest in my well-being. Your family sounds wonderful. I'm glad to hear that your children have such vibrant interests. The world needs more artists and dreamers. Your work as a teacher's assistant is admirable. Educators play such a crucial role in shaping the future. I appreciate your desire to build connections in your community. It's a noble goal, and one that I have neglected for far too long. Your kindness has reminded me of the importance of human connection, something I had almost forgotten. Since you have shared a bit about yourself, I suppose it's only fair that I do the same. I've lived in Chicago all my life, building a career in finance that has been more successful than I ever dreamed. But success came at a cost. I lost my wife, Margaret, and our son, Thomas, in a car accident 15 years ago. Since then, I'm afraid I've become something of a recluse. Your letters have stirred memories and feelings I thought were long buried. I'm not sure I'm ready to rejoin the world just yet, but I want you to know that your kindness has not gone unnoticed or unappreciated. Thank you for your thoughtfulness. Sincerely, Robert Hayes. As Robert sealed the envelope, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It had been so long since he had opened up to anyone about his loss. Sharing even this small part of his story with Emily felt like a monumental step. The next morning, Robert asked Mrs. Thompson to deliver the letter to Emily's home. As he watched his housekeeper drive away, he felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. He had taken a risk in sharing his past with Emily, and he wasn't sure how she would respond. Little did Robert know that his letter would be the catalyst for a series of events that would not only change his life, but also have a profound impact on Emily, her children, and eventually, the entire community. When Emily received Robert's letter, she was deeply moved by his openness. The tragedy he had experienced broke her heart, and she found herself blinking back tears as she read his words. She understood now why he had isolated himself, why he had been so reluctant to form new connections. That evening, after her children were in bed, Emily sat down to write her response. Her letter was filled with compassion and understanding, sharing her own experience of loss when her husband had left them 3 years ago. She didn't push for more than Robert was ready to give, but she did extend an open invitation for him to reach out if he ever wanted to talk. As the weeks passed, Robert and Emily continued to exchange letters. Slowly but surely, Robert began to open up more. He shared stories about his life before the accident, happy memories of family vacations, of Thomas's first steps, of quiet evenings spent with Margaret. Emily, in turn, shared more about her daily life, the challenges and joys of raising 2 young children on her own, her hopes and dreams for the future. Their correspondence became a bright spot in both their lives. For Robert, it was a lifeline to the world he had shut out for so long. For Emily, it was a source of support and friendship during her often overwhelming days. As autumn turned to winter, their letters became more frequent. Robert found himself looking forward to Emily's updates about her children's adventures and her own small triumphs at work. Emily eagerly anticipated Robert's thoughtful responses, which often included bits of wisdom from his years of experience. One snowy evening in December, as Robert sat in his study reading Emily's latest letter, he made a decision that would change everything. With trembling hands, he picked up his phone and dialed the number Emily had included in one of her early letters, just in case. The phone rang 3 times before Emily's warm voice answered, "Hello." For a moment, Robert couldn't speak. Then, clearing his throat, he said, "Hello, Emily. This is Robert Hayes. I hope I'm not disturbing you." There was a brief pause. Then Emily's voice came back, filled with surprise and warmth. "Mr. Hayes, no, you're not disturbing me at all. I'm so glad you called. How are you?" As they began to talk, their voices tentative at first, but growing more comfortable with each passing minute, both Robert and Emily felt the stirring of something new. It was the beginning of a friendship that would grow to mean more to both of them than they could have ever imagined. Their conversation that night lasted for hours, touching on topics they had explored in their letters but going deeper, the immediacy of voice-to-voice contact allowing for a level of connection their written words hadn't quite achieved. They laughed together over funny anecdotes, commiserated over life's challenges, and shared moments of quiet understanding. As the clock struck midnight, Emily stifled a yawn, suddenly aware of how late it had gotten. "Oh my goodness, Mr. Hayes, Robert. I didn't realize how long we've been talking. I should probably get some sleep. I have to be up early for work tomorrow." Robert, too, was surprised by how quickly the time had passed. "Of course. I apologize for keeping you up so late. I've enjoyed our conversation very much, Emily." "So have I," Emily replied warmly. "Please, feel free to call again any time. And maybe we could meet for coffee sometime. Only if you're comfortable with that, of course." There was a pause on the line, and Emily held her breath, wondering if she had pushed too far. But then Robert's voice came back, soft but determined. "I think I'd like that, Emily. Thank you." As they said their goodnights, both Robert and Emily felt a sense of excitement and possibility that had been absent from their lives for far too long. This phone call marked a turning point, the moment when their relationship shifted from a pen-pal correspondence to something more real and immediate. In the days that followed, Robert found himself looking at the world with new eyes. The Christmas lights twinkling in his neighbors' windows, which he had ignored for years, suddenly seemed beautiful. The sound of children laughing as they played in the snow-covered park near his home no longer filled him with sadness, but with a wistful kind of joy. Emily, too, felt a change. The weight of single parenthood and financial stress seemed a little lighter knowing she had a friend who understood and cared. She found herself smiling more, laughing more easily with her children, approaching her days with renewed energy and optimism. As Christmas approached, Robert and Emily made plans to meet for coffee. They chose a small, quiet cafe not far from Emily's apartment. On the day of their meeting, Robert arrived early, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness he hadn't felt in years. When Emily walked in, her cheeks flushed from the cold and her eyes bright with excitement, Robert felt something shift inside him. Seeing her in person, hearing her voice without the filter of a phone line, made everything suddenly very real. Their coffee date lasted for hours, the conversation flowing easily between them. They talked about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their favorite books, their hopes for the future. As they spoke, the walls Robert had built around his heart continued to crumble, and he found himself laughing more than he had in years. As they were preparing to leave, Emily hesitated for a moment before asking, "Robert, I know this might be too much, but would you like to join my children and me for Christmas dinner? It's nothing fancy, just a small family celebration, but we'd love to have you." Robert was taken aback by the invitation. The thought of spending Christmas with others, of being part of a family celebration again, was both terrifying and incredibly tempting. After a moment of internal struggle, he found himself nodding. I think I'd like that very much, Emily. Thank you." The smile that lit up Emily's face at his acceptance warmed Robert's heart in a way he had almost forgotten was possible. As they parted ways, both felt a sense of anticipation for what the future might hold. Little did they know that this Christmas dinner would be the beginning of a new chapter in both their lives. It would mark the start of Robert's slow but steady reintegration into the world, and the beginning of a support system for Emily that would change her life and the lives of her children in ways she could never have imagined. As Robert drove home that day, the city around him seemed brighter somehow, full of possibilities he had long since given up on. And in her small apartment, as Emily prepared dinner for her children, she felt a sense of hope and excitement for the future that had been missing for far too long. The story of Robert Hayes and Emily Parker was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Their unlikely friendship would go on to touch not only their own lives, but the lives of countless others in their community. It would be a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of human connection, and the incredible capacity of the human heart to heal and love again, even in the face of great loss and adversity. As Christmas Day approached, Robert found himself experiencing a mix of emotions he hadn't felt in years. Excitement warred with anxiety as he contemplated spending the holiday with Emily and her children. He spent hours agonizing over what gifts to bring, finally settling on carefully chosen books for Lily and Max, and a delicate silver necklace for Emily that had once belonged to his late wife, Margaret. On Christmas morning, Robert stood before his mirror, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. The man staring back at him seemed different somehow. There was a spark in his eyes that had been missing for far too long. As he left his mansion, he paused for a moment, looking back at the grand but empty house. For the first time in years, he felt a twinge of regret at the life he had been living, isolated and alone. The drive to Emily's apartment was filled with nervous anticipation. As Robert climbed the stairs to her floor, gift bags in hand, he could hear the sound of children's laughter and Christmas music drifting through the hallway. He hesitated for a moment before knocking, taking a deep breath to steady himself. The door swung open, and there was Emily, her face alight with warmth and welcome. "Robert, Merry Christmas. Please come in," she said, ushering him inside. The small apartment was a world away from Robert's mansion. It was cluttered and lived in, with a modestly decorated Christmas tree in the corner and the aroma of roasting turkey filling the air. Lily and Max peered at him curiously from behind their mother, their eyes wide with excitement at the sight of the gift bags. "Children, this is Mr. Hayes," Emily introduced. "Remember, we talked about him joining us for Christmas?" Max, ever the bold one, stepped forward. "Did you bring presents?" he asked, eyeing the bags hopefully. "Max!" Emily admonished, but Robert chuckled, feeling some of his nervousness dissipate. "As a matter of fact, I did," he said, kneeling down to the children's level. "Would you like to open them?" The next few minutes were a flurry of torn wrapping paper and exclamations of delight. Lily hugged her new art book to her chest, while Max immediately began flipping through his book on race cars. Emily gasped when she opened the small jewelry box, her fingers tracing the delicate silver chain. "Robert, it's beautiful," she whispered. But it's too much. I can't—" "Please," Robert interrupted gently. "It was my wife's. I'd like you to have it. She would have wanted it to be worn and appreciated, not locked away in a drawer." Emily's eyes glistened with tears as she nodded, allowing Robert to fasten the necklace around her neck. The moment felt significant, though neither could quite articulate why. The rest of the day passed in a blur of laughter, good food, and warm conversation. Robert found himself relaxing more and more as the hours went by, drawn into the children's games and Emily's easy companionship. As they sat around the table for Christmas dinner, he looked at the faces around him and felt a sense of belonging he had thought was lost to him forever. That Christmas marked a turning point for both Robert and Emily. For Robert, it was the beginning of his journey back to the land of the living. He started small, accepting Emily's invitations to family movie nights or weekend picnics in the park. Slowly but surely, he found himself becoming a part of their lives. Emily, too, found her life changing in ways she hadn't anticipated. Robert's friendship provided not just emotional support, but practical help as well. When her old car finally gave up the ghost, Robert insisted on helping her find a reliable replacement. When Lily needed braces, he quietly arranged to cover the costs Emily's insurance wouldn't. As winter melted into spring, Robert's involvement in Emily's life, and by extension, the community, grew. He started attending Lily's art shows at school and Max's Little League games. The other parents were curious about this wealthy, distinguished man who had suddenly appeared in their midst. But Robert's genuine warmth and Emily's obvious trust in him soon won them over. One sunny Saturday in April, as Robert cheered on Max's team from the bleachers, he overheard a conversation between two other parents. They were discussing the community center's financial troubles and the programs that might have to be cut as a result. Robert listened intently, an idea beginning to form in his mind. That evening, over dinner at Emily's apartment, a weekly tradition by now, Robert broached the subject. "Emily, what would you think about starting a foundation?" he asked. "Something to support the community, help families who are struggling like you were?" Emily's eyes widened. "Robert, that's an incredible idea, but it's also a huge undertaking. Are you sure?" Robert nodded, feeling more certain than he had about anything in years. "I am. I've been blessed with more money than I could ever need, and for too long, I've done nothing worthwhile with it. It's time I changed that." And so, the Hayes Parker Foundation was born. Robert provided the initial funding and business acumen, while Emily brought her intimate knowledge of the community's needs and her passion for helping others. Together, they created something truly special. The foundation's first project was saving the community center. Not only did they provide the necessary funds to keep all programs running, but they also expanded them, offering after-school tutoring, job training for adults, and a food bank for families in need. As news of the foundation's work spread, more and more people came forward wanting to help. Robert found himself surrounded by a network of volunteers, all passionate about making a difference in their community. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, his days filled with purpose and meaning. Emily, too, flourished in her new role. She left her job as a teacher's assistant to work full-time for the foundation, her natural empathy and organizational skills making her an invaluable asset. Watching her in action, Robert often found himself marveling at her strength and compassion. As the months passed, Robert and Emily's friendship deepened into something more. They were partners in every sense of the word, supporting each other through the challenges of running the foundation and sharing in its triumphs. The lines between their personal and professional lives blurred. Their evenings often spent discussing foundation business over dinner, with Lily and Max chiming in with their own ideas. It was on one such evening, as they sat on Emily's small balcony watching the sunset, that Robert realized something had changed. He looked at Emily, her face animated as she talked about a new program she wanted to implement, and felt his heart swell with an emotion he had thought he'd never feel again. "Emily," he said softly, interrupting her mid-sentence. She turned to him, a question in her eyes. I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Emily's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and something else, hope, perhaps, flickering across her face. For a moment, Robert feared he had overstepped, ruined the beautiful friendship they had built. But then Emily smiled, reaching out to take his hand. "Oh, Robert," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I think I fell in love with you months ago." Their first kiss was soft and sweet, filled with the promise of a future neither had dared to imagine. As they broke apart, both laughing a little breathlessly, they heard a cheer from inside the apartment. Turning, they saw Lily and Max watching them through the window, grinning from ear to ear. The path forward wasn't always smooth. Robert had to learn how to be part of a family again, to open his heart not just to Emily but to her children as well. Emily had to navigate the complexities of introducing a new partner into her children's lives, of blending their two very different worlds. But with each passing day, they grew stronger together. The foundation continued to thrive, expanding its reach and impact. Robert's mansion, once a symbol of his isolation, became a place of warmth and laughter, filled with the sounds of family dinners and children's play. 2 years after that first Christmas dinner, Robert and Emily were married in a small ceremony in the community center they had saved together. Lily and Max stood proudly by their side, while the room was filled with the many lives they had touched through their work. As they exchanged vows, Robert looked out at the gathered crowd, the volunteers who had become friends, the families they had helped, the community they had brought together, and felt a sense of awe. From one small act of kindness in a grocery store had grown all of this, a love he never thought he'd find again, a family he adored, and a purpose that filled his days with joy. Emily, radiant in her simple white dress, squeezed his hand as if reading his thoughts. "Who would have thought," she whispered, her eyes shining with happy tears, "that a declined credit card could lead to all this?" Robert laughed, pulling her close. "I guess, sometimes, the universe knows what we need better than we do," he replied, as they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheered on by their friends and family. Robert and Emily knew that this was just the beginning of their story. They had a lifetime ahead of them, a lifetime of love, of family, and of making a difference in the world around them. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, hope and love can find a way to shine through. Their story would go on to inspire countless others, a testament to the power of human connection and the incredible capacity of the heart to heal, to grow, and to love again. As the years passed, the Hayes Parker Foundation became a cornerstone of the community. Robert and Emily worked tirelessly to expand its reach, always finding new ways to help those in need. They established scholarships for underprivileged students, set up a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs, and even opened a health clinic to provide affordable care to families struggling with medical bills. Lily and Max grew up surrounded by the spirit of giving back. Lily's artistic talents blossomed, and she often volunteered to teach art classes at the community center. Max's passion for cars evolved into an interest in engineering, and he helped set up a program teaching basic auto repair skills to unemployed adults, giving them a valuable trade. Robert, once known as the reclusive millionaire, became a beloved figure in the community. His business acumen, combined with Emily's compassion and understanding of local needs, made them an unstoppable force for good. They were often seen walking hand in hand through the neighborhood, stopping to chat with everyone from shopkeepers to school children. Their home, once a symbol of Robert's isolation, became a gathering place for friends, family, and community members. The grand dining room that had sat empty for so long now regularly hosted charity galas and community meetings. The sprawling gardens were opened to the public, providing a beautiful space for picnics and outdoor events. As Robert and Emily celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary, they took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. They stood in the community center, now a thriving hub of activity, surrounded by photos documenting the foundation's work over the years. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met that day in the grocery store?" Emily asked, leaning into Robert's embrace. Robert smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I remember something my father used to say. Coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. I think we were meant to find each other, Emily, to help each other heal, and to do all of this together." Emily nodded, her eyes misting with tears as she looked at a photo of their wedding day. "I just wish your family could have been here to see all of this," she said softly. Robert was quiet for a moment, his thoughts turning to Margaret and Thomas. "Or in a way, I think they are," he said finally. "I feel them in every life we touch, in every smile we bring to a child's face. They're a part of this, too." As they stood there, lost in reflection, they heard the sound of laughter approaching. Turning, they saw Lily and Max entering the center, surrounded by a group of children from the after-school program. Lily, now a talented artist in her own right, was carrying a large canvas covered with a cloth. Max, studying engineering in college, had a toolbox in hand, ready to help with some repairs. "Mom! Dad!" Max called out, his face breaking into a wide grin. "We've got a surprise for you!" Lily stepped forward, her eyes shining with excitement. "To celebrate your anniversary and everything you've done for the community," she said, pulling the cloth off the canvas with a flourish. The painting was a masterpiece, a vibrant depiction of the community center bustling with life. In the foreground stood Robert and Emily, surrounded by smiling faces of all ages and backgrounds. The detail was incredible. Every brush stroke seemed to capture the spirit of love and unity they had worked so hard to foster. As Robert and Emily stood there, arms around each other, taking in the beautiful gift their children had created, they felt a sense of completeness. This was more than they could have ever dreamed of. A life full of love, purpose, and the joy of making a difference. Their story had become a beacon of hope for the community, a reminder that it's never too late to open your heart, to reach out to others, and to find a new purpose in life. From a chance encounter in a grocery store had grown a legacy of love and compassion that would continue to touch lives for generations to come. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the windows of the community center, Robert and Emily shared a tender kiss, surrounded by the family and community they had built together. They knew that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, their love for each other and for their community guiding them forward. And so, the story of the lonely millionaire and the struggling single mother continued to unfold. A testament to the transformative power of kindness, the strength found in unity, and the endless possibilities that arise when we open our hearts to others. Their journey served as a powerful reminder that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin in the most unexpected places, and that love, in all its forms, has the power to change the world. As the years rolled on, the impact of Robert and Emily's work continued to grow, rippling out far beyond the boundaries of their initial community. The Hayes Parker Foundation became a model for philanthropic organizations across the country, its success inspiring others to take action in their own communities. On the eve of the foundation's 15th anniversary, Robert and Emily found themselves preparing for their largest fundraising gala yet. The event was to be held in the grand ballroom of the Hayes Mansion, now a warm and welcoming space that bore little resemblance to the cold, empty house it had once been. As Emily fussed with Robert's bow tie, smoothing down the lapels of his tuxedo, she couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. "Can you believe it's been 15 years?" she asked, her eyes meeting his in the mirror. Robert smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling with warmth and affection. "In some ways, it feels like just yesterday," he replied, turning to face her. "And in others, it's as if I've known you my entire life." Emily leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. "I'm so proud of you, Robert," she murmured. "Of us. Of everything we've built together." Their moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. "Mom, Dad." "Are you ready?" It was Lily's voice, now a young woman of 23, her artistic talent having blossomed into a successful career as an illustrator. "Coming, sweetheart," Emily called back. With one last look in the mirror, she took Robert's arm, and together they made their way downstairs. The ballroom was a sight to behold. Elegant decorations adorned every surface, and the room buzzed with the excited chatter of hundreds of guests. Community leaders, volunteers, beneficiaries of the Foundation's programs, and supporters from across the country had all gathered to celebrate the organization's achievements. As Robert and Emily made their entrance, a hush fell over the crowd, followed by a thunderous round of applause. They made their way to the stage, where Max, now a successful engineer with his own startup focused on sustainable technology, was waiting to introduce them. "Ladies and gentlemen," Max began, his voice strong and confident, "it is my honor to introduce the founders of the Hayes Parker Foundation, my parents, Robert and Emily Hayes." As Robert stepped up to the microphone, he felt a swell of emotion. Looking out at the sea of faces before him, he saw not just guests at a gala, but a community that had become family. He saw the young woman in the front row who had been the first recipient of their college scholarship, now a doctor working at the foundation's health clinic. He saw the elderly couple who had been on the verge of losing their home before the foundation's housing assistance program had stepped in. He saw volunteers who had given countless hours of their time, and donors whose generosity had made so many dreams possible. 15 years ago, Robert began, his voice steady despite the emotion he felt. I was a very different man. I had wealth beyond measure, but I was poor in all the ways that truly matter. I had closed myself off from the world, convinced that isolation was the only way to protect myself from further pain. He paused, reaching for Emily's hand. She squeezed it reassuringly, her presence giving him strength as it had countless times over the years. And then, by what I can only describe as a miracle, I met Emily, he continued. Through her kindness, her compassion, and her unwavering belief in the goodness of people, she showed me that there was another way to live. She taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the lives we touch and the love we share. Robert went on to recount the foundation's journey, from its humble beginnings saving the local community center to its current status as a nationally recognized organization. He spoke of the thousands of lives they had impacted, the communities they had helped revitalize, and the hope they had restored to so many who had lost their way. As he concluded his speech, Robert's voice filled with passion and conviction. "But our work is far from over," he declared. "As long as there are people in need, as long as there are communities struggling to thrive, we will continue to fight. Because we've learned that when we come together, when we open our hearts and extend our hands to one another, there is no challenge we cannot overcome." The applause that followed was deafening, many in the audience rising to their feet in a standing ovation. As Robert and Emily made their way off the stage, they were engulfed in a sea of well-wishers, each with a story to share about how the foundation had touched their lives. Later that evening, as the gala wound down, Robert and Emily found a quiet moment alone on the mansion's terrace. The night air was cool and crisp, the sky above them a canvas of twinkling stars. "Do you ever wonder," Emily asked softly, "what would have happened if we hadn't met that day in the grocery store?" Robert was quiet for a moment, his arm tightening around her waist. "I used to," he admitted. "But now, I prefer to think about all that's happened since, about the incredible journey we've been on together." Emily nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder. "It's amazing, isn't it, how one small act of kindness can set off such a chain reaction." As they stood there, basking in the glow of the evening's success and the warmth of their love for each other, they heard the sound of approaching footsteps. Turning, they saw Lily and Max, along with a group of young volunteers from the foundation. "There you are," Lily exclaimed. "We've been looking everywhere for you. We wanted to show you something." The group led Robert and Emily back inside, through the now empty ballroom and into a small side room. There, propped up on an easel, was a large, covered canvas. "We've been working on this for months," Max explained, his eyes shining with excitement. "It's our way of saying thank you for everything you've done, not just for us, but for so many others." With a flourish, Lily pulled away the cover, revealing a stunning mural. It was a collage of sorts, filled with hundreds of tiny images, photographs, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, all telling the story of the Hayes Parker Foundation's impact over the years. In the center of the mural were two figures, instantly recognizable as Robert and Emily. But instead of being depicted as they were now, the artist had chosen to portray them as they had been on that fateful day in the grocery store. Robert, the lonely millionaire reaching out to help, and Emily, the struggling single mother, her face a mix of gratitude and hope. As Robert and Emily stood there, taking in the beautiful tribute their children and the foundation's volunteers had created, they felt the weight of the journey they had undertaken. From that chance encounter in a grocery store had grown not just a love story, but a legacy of compassion and community that would continue to touch lives for generations to come. "This is just the beginning," Emily said softly, her voice filled with determination and hope. "There's still so much more we can do." Robert nodded, pulling her close. "Together," he said, "we can change the world. One act of kindness at a time." As they stood there, surrounded by the love of their family and the tangible results of their life's work, Robert and Emily knew that their story was far from over. They had many more chapters yet to write, many more lives to touch, and many more dreams to help realize. And so, the tale of the lonely millionaire and the struggling single mother continued to unfold, a beacon of hope in a world that sometimes seemed dark and uncaring. Their story served as a reminder to all who heard it that love, compassion, and the willingness to reach out to others have the power to transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. As the night drew to a close and the last of the guests departed, Robert and Emily found themselves once again alone in the grand foyer of their home. The mansion, once a symbol of Robert's isolation, now stood as a testament to the life they had built together, a life filled with love, purpose, and the joy of making a difference. Emily turned to Robert, her eyes shining with unshed tears of happiness. "You know," she said softly, "when I was struggling to make ends meet all those years ago, I never could have imagined this. You've given me and the children so much." Robert shook his head, gently cupping her face in his hands. "No, my love," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "It is you who have given me everything. You showed me how to live again, how to love again. You gave me a family, a purpose. Everything we've accomplished, we've done together." As they shared a tender kiss, both Robert and Emily knew that their greatest adventure was still ahead of them. They had touched countless lives through their work with the foundation, but they knew there was still so much more to be done. The world was full of people in need of hope, of communities waiting to be revitalized, of dreams waiting to be realized. And so, hand in hand, Robert and Emily Hayes looked to the future, ready to face whatever challenges it might bring. They knew that as long as they had each other, their family, and their unwavering commitment to making the world a better place, there was nothing they couldn't achieve. Their story, which had begun with a simple act of kindness in a grocery store, had blossomed into a tale of love, redemption, and the incredible power of human connection. It served as an inspiration to all who heard it, a reminder that it's never too late to open your heart, to reach out to others, and to find a new purpose in life. As they climbed the grand staircase to their bedroom, Robert and Emily's hearts were full of gratitude for the journey they had shared and excitement for the path that still lay ahead. They knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference, and new chances to spread love and kindness in the world. And so, the story of the lonely millionaire and the struggling single mother continued, a living testament to the transformative power of love and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Their legacy would live on, not just in the work of the Hayes Parker Foundation, but in the countless lives they had touched and the ripple effect of kindness they had set in motion. As they drifted off to sleep that night, Robert and Emily's dreams were filled with visions of a brighter future, a future they would continue to build together, one act of kindness at a time.